up until now, at least in India, the hotel industry has not been the most investor friendly industry. It is asset heavy, cash flow guzzling, the gestation period are wrong. It is a cyclical and a seasonal business, and overall, the returns can be choppy. Uh, but something is changing. Hello, good evening. So, today we'll be decoding the hotel industry. Now, this is a segment that I think every one of us is aware about. So it's something that has touched all our life. So it's going to be a very interesting presentation, lots of narratives and some amazing numbers. But before I get started, I just have a couple of disclosures to make. So I'll be talking about a lot of listed companies both globally and in India, and I'm not making any buy, sell, or hold recommendation. Another disclosure that I want to make is all the industry data that I'll be representing will be purely on the branded hotel side. So, just as a side note, the unbranded supply is 5 times as big as the branded supply. So, it might not tell the whole picture, but we'll be looking at it only from the branded perspective. And also, most of the data is collected by consultants, these consultancy firms who have their own proprietary research. So, the data might vary from one firm to another based on what they consider branded. So, don't focus too much on the data. We are here to see the trend. So, let's get started. So I read this really good book called Oyo to Oberoi, and it gives a very nice bird eye perspective on the entirety of the hotel industry. Uh, in that book, they started off by introducing this cast of character, which I found very interesting. And I'm going to borrow that and we'll look at the cast of characters. So the first is the grand old warriors. So the Indian hospitality industry have been dominated by the three big players. That's your Taj, your Oberoi, and ITC. They are the big threes who pioneered hotel industry in India and still continue to be the top even till date. Taj has a 120-year history, and it started off in 1903 with just one hotel right here, and it has grown. It was not anticipated to become what it is today. When it was started, it was just one hotel that built because the Tatas wanted to add something to the Bombay skyline. Uh, but in and it was not a very well run hotel either. So by the 1960s, it was completely in the red. In fact, famously, J.R.D. Tata has even joked that he does not know where to start with um, Taj because he does not know how to fix it. The condition was not the best at that time, and they had even considered getting in branding it with Hilton at one point of time. And at one point of time, they even thought that they might have to take it down and rebuild the entire thing. So that's how the condition was. But luckily, they did not do that, and they got an Ajit Kerkar who who basically created the IHCL, the Indian Hotels company that we know today. So he created that chain, and Taj has been phenomenal in developing the whole hospitality segment as a whole. He opened up Goa as a destination, Udaipur. They were the first to get in the palace segment, the heritage properties. So they converted the Taj Lake Palace uh, and the some other properties in Udaipur as well. Um, then we have your Oberois. So that's another wonderful story in itself. Very inspiring. So I would say I wouldn't go too much into that. I think you should pick up the book Dare to Dream. It has an amazing history about the entire company. And Oberoi has stood till date as the epitome of luxury. It still defines luxury. And they are known for their impeccable service and they still stand for that. Um, After that, we have ITC. So ITC, again, ITC was started as a way to put the surplus tobacco business into assets. And initially, most people just brush them away like they're just using the excess capital just building assets, and they didn't take them very seriously. But I think ITC has more than um, made its name in the industry today. They stood out with their F&B segment. So they are the one who truly defined food and beverages when it came to hotel industry. They made it the very center and not just an additional proposition when you go to the hotels, right? In fact, it is famously said when they were conceptualizing the idea of ITC, um, Habib Rahman said that he envisions ITC as a modern modern Indian woman with a large bindi. So that's the image that they had for ITC, and it somewhat stands for that. You can see that Indianness with the modernness in ITC, so that Indian luxury. And they've also created some great restaurants, great brands, focusing on the Indianness of it. And yeah, and another segment that they've done really well is like sustainable luxury. So that's something that they lead in amongst all the hotel groups when it comes to sustainability and responsible luxury. We also have some other players that are worth mentioning, like Leela. So Leela has had an interesting history, and as a company, they have flirted with bankruptcy way too many times, and have had run into a lot of financial troubles. And in the end, they ended up selling it to Brookfield. But overall, they have also made the mark when it comes to the luxury segment and created a brand that we all know today. You also have the Lalit and the Park hotels, which are some noteworthy mentions. Then we have the regional legends. So while these are pan-India players, every region also has certain players that are maybe not well known pan-India, but they're very well entrenched in their own regions. And they have done, and a lot of bigger players still have trouble competing with them when it comes in their territory. Something like your Mayfairs in the northeast, your Grand Dragon in Leh, Kamats in Maharashtra and Konkan region. So all of them are best in the regions. They can move out, but let's see. But they've done very well for themselves in the region. You also have the global Goliaths. So these are your foreign brands, your Marriott, Hyatt, Hilton, and intercontinental hotels. Uh, so they first entered India. So the first person to enter India was IAG, that's the Intercontinental Group, with a partnership with Oberoi back in the 1960s. And in that time, they were not very much interested. India was not a very key market for them. It was still growing. They didn't see the demand. They didn't see that luxury segment in India. And it was more of a pull. Oberoi wanted to get them in because they wanted to get more Western standards in the hospitality industry. So it was more a pull rather than a push. And later, they mainly came in host during the 2000s. So in the 2000s, you saw a floodgate open post your liberalization, and when the demand was seen increasing, and that time all the players flooded the market, and they are amongst the top players now. So Marriott currently, it's the in terms of room, is the biggest player in India. So they are made a very well. They're deeply entrenched in our soil right now. Uh, in terms of owners, we have your high net worth holding owners. So in India, most of the owners are it's a very fragmented market. Most of your owners will be politicians, business families, uh, high net worth individuals, and it's extremely fragmented. You have your prince or old landlords, zamindars who have excess land. Uh, it's extremely fragmented. If you look at it, 50% of the supply today, more than 50%, comes from hedge and high net worth hotel owners. Then you have your real estate owners. So here you have the Raheja Group, which owns Chalet Hotel. You have the Brigade Group. You have DLH, and so for the real estate owners, hospitality is a very small part of the overall portfolio. So when it comes to developing an asset, you first would want to develop a commercial asset because that gives the best returns. Then would be an apartment. a residential project, uh, followed by retail, and at the very end is hospitality because it's a very cyclical business and not a very easy one. And for all of these players, while they're very big, hospitality is a very small segment of the overall thing because it's a value add. So, mixed development, hospitality, hotel would just make sense because you'll have captive demand right there. And yeah, and it also adds value to the overall project as a whole. So, for example, for Brigade Group, the hospitality part of it is just be 5%. Still a very small segment part of their overall portfolio. Then you have your institutional investors. So this is the smallest segment. This is less than 3% currently in terms of hotel loans. So this is something that's growing and that's good. That means that there's formalization happening in the industry and you have more serious institutional investors coming in. Uh, in this, you have Sami, which is a PE-backed firm, and yeah, you also have Leela Group, which is owned by Brookfield. So that's another institutional backed hotels that you have. Next is the government. So I don't think your hotel presentation will be complete without talking about the government. So in the early 90s, uh, there was a there were not many hotels overall in India. No one wanted to put them up either. So during that time, ITDC has took that charge and they actually developed a lot of hotels uh, all over Bangalore, all over India, and they have had a huge play when it has come to developing the hotel segment. Now, of course, they're not involved in it as much, and they are fully in a process of divesting, and they have already divested most of the properties and handed it over to people who can better manage them. But some of the noteworthy mention would still be the Ashok in Delhi, the heritage set. So this is something that um is a beautiful segment and has set India apart as a tourist destination also. So post your independence, there were a lot of palaces and havelis that came in the market, and there were a very good segment and got converted into hotels. You have your Taj Lake Palace, which is a beautiful example. Taj has, of course, renovated that property and added a new wing to make it more economically viable. While this is a very nice segment and it brings in a lot of money and your room revenues can be amazing, it's also not very easy because they're really old properties that you're dealing with. So the development cost is also very high. You have to completely revamp the hotel while also maintaining the essence of it. You have to modernize the whole thing. People want to stay at Havelis, but they still want their Wi-Fi and their plug points in place. So the whole thing is a little messy, but a very interesting segment and which has really opened up India as a tourist destination. At the very end, we have the disruptors. So this would be your Oyo, your Airbnb, your Stay Vista, hostels. There are a lot of smaller segments coming up, and it's interesting to see how it is playing out. You One of the biggest disruptor though would be the OTAs. That's your Make My Trip, your Booking.com. They have really changed the way uh, hotel booking used to work, and by bringing that kind of transparency, they've also blurred the line between branded and unbranded hotels. So there's a huge argument that every hotel that is listed on OTA should be considered as a branded hotel because now that visibility is available to them. Uh, so yeah, uh, so this is the overall view of the hotel industry. And before we move on, I want to say that so up until now, at least in India, the hotel industry has not been the most investor friendly industry. It is asset heavy, cash flow guzzling, the gestation period are wrong. It is a cyclical and a seasonal business. And overall, the returns can be choppy. Uh, but something is changing. Post pandemic, a new model has picked up. It's not new, it's something very old, but I think the pace of adoption has picked up, and it's something that we have already seen play out globally. So this is Marriott. So Marriott is currently the largest hotel owners in terms of inventory of rooms, and they have gotten so big through a lot of acquisitions also. So one of the biggest acquisition was Starwood that happened in 2016. And I think Marriott is all around us without us even knowing it. So now after these acquisitions, there are so many brands under it that you won't even realize if it's a Marriott or not. So it's just not Marriott or Courtyard by Marriott. You also have your St. Regis, your Ritz-Carlton, your Sheraton. All of them are Marriott brands. Marriott overall has 9,173 properties worldwide. That equals about 16 lakh rooms. So huge scale globally. But how many of them do you actually think they own? Does anyone want to get take a guess, a number? Hmm? A number? How many properties do they own? So it is 51 properties. So out of the 9,000 odd properties, they only own 51 properties. And that's about 14,000 rooms. Uh, so this is what I want to talk about, the asset right way. They have been able to expand at this pace and this had become this size because uh, they're not owning the properties, they're just branding them. So that's one of the ways that they have been able to get a global scale. But it's noteworthy to know that those 51 properties still account for 28% of the revenue. So it's still a huge chunk. Uh, to see a more life cycle about how that has changed, Marriott back in 2005 used to have about 78% owned hotels, and that has slowly come down currently to 28%. So you have seen that whole change happen. Uh, of course, they have also sold off a lot of properties during that time. So they're just not adding new properties by the branded route. They have also sold a lot of their properties and spun off their companies as well. The same change that we see in Hilton as well. Hilton had about 80% owned, and that has slowly come down to around 25%. Um, Hilton in 2017, around 2016, 2017, they spun off their most of the real estate into a REIT. So they separated most of the real estate into another group and also the timeshare business into another separate companies. And that's how they were able to lighten the balance sheet. But what exactly does managed and franchisee mean? So when it comes to hotels, there are three aspects to it. One is owning the hotel, second is managing the asset, and third is branding the asset. So in owning the asset is the person who owns and develops the property. Of course, it can also be leased, so that also comes under that. You can lease the property, but whoever is paying that lease. Second is managing the assets. So each hotel has to be operated. There are certain operational aspect to it. So who is actually managing, running the hotel, the show, who is setting the prices of the hotels, who is doing your check-in, who is cleaning your rooms, all of that, who is managing your asset, who is doing the upkeeps, who is doing the renovations. And third is branding the asset. Whose name is actually on your asset, who is branding your asset, and who is distributing your asset by that brand name. So those are three aspects when it comes to hotels. So let's look at it through examples, right? So if we take Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, so this hotel, the land, the building, everything is owned by Indian Hotels. So they own the land, they own the asset. Uh, the property is also managed by the Taj Group. So they are the one who runs the show, the operations, manages everything in the hotel. And it's also branded under the Indian hotel brand, that Taj Mahal. So it's completely owned, managed, and branded by the Taj Group. This is the old way of doing hotels. If you look at JW Marriott next to the airport, I'm sure you would have seen this. So this property is owned by Chalet Group, Chalet Hotels. So that's the Raheja group that owns the asset. Uh, but the management is of Marriott. So Marriott manages the day-to-day operations. It sells the room price, and it is also branded under one of the premium Marriott brands, that's JW. Now, want to talk a little bit about these arrangements. So when it's a management contract, uh, the company, so Marriott will be getting a certain percentage share in the revenue. So that's normally 3 to 4% share of the revenue that the chalet hotels is paying Marriott. Plus, because they're also managing it, they also get a certain percentage of the profits as well, the GOP, the gross operating profit. So that can be somewhere around 7 to 8%. So overall, say 4 to 5% of your revenue that you would be paying for someone else to come and manage. Of course, this can vary from group to group and based on your negotiating power. So if you look at some of the listed companies, you have Chalet, you have Sami, they end up paying almost 5% of the revenues to for management contracts. But they are bigger groups. As you go on to smaller, negotiating powers changes, so it can go anywhere from 5 to 6% to about 10 to 12%. Uh, then you have Four Points by Sheraton. This is a Navi Mumbai property. So this hotel is also again owned by the Raheja Group, again under Chalet, and but it is managed by Chalet Hotels. On the Chalet Hotels do the management of the hotel as well. They only have partnered with Marriott for the branding. So Marriott is just providing the name and their distribution system. So they can get the bookings through their website. So they are branded under the Four Points by Sheraton brand under Marriott. Over here, you normally just get a piece of the revenue. So that would be around, again, 3 to 4% of your revenue that you would be paying Marriott to get it branded. Now, why do we do it? What's in it for the brand? So for a brand to reach the scale, like let's take Marriott, for example. Marriott currently has its name over more than $500 billion of worth of assets. Now, that's not something that they would have been able to do on their own balance sheet. It's not something very easy to do. So, the management way is the best way, and it's all about creating a network effect also, right? So Marriott is known for its loyalty program. Now, the more number of loyalty members you have, the more number of hotels wants to partner with you. The more number of hotels you have, the more number of loyalty members you have. It's a network effect, and they want to have a global scale. Now they want their American customer to use their points that they earn by staying in America on a trip when they travel to China also. So in China, they can still stay at a Marriott property and use their points. Um, this is from Hilton's presentation. So they say that they have total capital in pipeline of about for more than $60 billion, and the current investment is only 325 million. So on a very very limited capital, they're able to achieve a bigger scale. So with her, another thing comes into picture, right? Um, for very less capital invested, you are getting higher returns. So your return profiles can improve marginally. Some of the ROC numbers, if you look at, so Hilton from in 2011 was doing around 5% ROC, is currently at 31%, and Marriott at 18 is currently at 35. So your ROCs numbers have the potential to increase exponentially as they move to more manager franchising model. Now, what's in it for the owner? Why would an asset owner want to partner, pay someone else 5 or 10% of their top line? Why would you want to do that? Now, for some asset owners, they don't really know much about brand hotel business. They don't want to get into that. They just have an asset that they want to monetize. So an easy way out is get someone in, let them manage the property for you. Uh, and for some, the um, synergies actually make sense. So what do the brand actually bring in for the hotel? So something that they bring in is they already have the digital aspect of it set. You have your website ready. You don't have to develop an app. Everything is ready. You just have to plug in the model. The sales team, all of these global brands, they have a global sales team. So you know that you don't have to worry about branding the hotel marketing as well, and they already have contracts with big corporates. So, when they're traveling to India, they can stay at your properties as well. Loyalty becomes a big aspect because one of the biggest cost in hotels is distribution cost. So, loyalty becomes a big aspect of it when Marriott Bonvoy and Hilton owners both individually have around 200 million loyalty users. So that's a captive base that you already have, and most of them are more likely to book through Marriott as Marriott only. And they come, your loyalty owners come directly through your platform, so you don't have to pay a cut to the OTAs as well. Reservations and revenue management, so they already have developed the systems required to manage your hotel. So you'll have your revenue management systems, you have your to check how the demand is there, how the demand is going, how do you want to, what rates do you want to give your room. So all of that infrastructure is already built. Again, just a plug and play for you, nothing that you have to develop in house. Of course, that moat is going away a little because you have a lot of small SaaS startups that are coming up in this space, which make it easier, but it's still something that they bring in. uh, Another thing is they already have contracts in place with suppliers, so you're able to get better deals on everything that you're sourcing, and you're able to source them at a much better negotiated deal. You also have favorable credit card rates and OTA. So OTA is one of the most important thing over here as well. Um, when it comes to individual hotels, they don't have much of a bargaining power when it comes to OTAs, not the same way that a Marriott or Hilton would have. Um, they Marriott and Hilton or any other larger group will be able to negotiate a better deal with OTAs. So for a Marriott or a Hilton, the OTAs would probably charge 10% of the revenue, but for the individual hotel, it can go anywhere up from 20 to 35%. So that's a huge chunk that you'll be paying right off from your revenue for just finding you a customers. That's a huge fees. So that's one of the biggest benefits that partnering with a bigger group brings you in. First, that most of your reservations are going to come directly from your own online platform through your loyalty members. And second, even if it comes to OTAs, it'll be at a better negotiated rate. But is it that simple? So on books, it looks amazing. Like, okay, you have an asset, you want to monetize it, you don't want to get into the whole hospitality thing, just get in a partner. And for the partner, you're getting like near infinite ROIC. So it's a win-win, right? But it's not that simple when it comes to the actual operational part of it. Sometimes there's a lot of mismatch between the expectations of both the asset owners and the brand. So what the brand wants, what's best for its image and the brand standards. And the asset owner basically just cares for the return on their asset, right? So there's sometimes there's a huge mismatch that can happen over there. And operationally, you can the hotel can say that I'm running well, I'm getting a 50% EBITDA margin, but that might just equal to a 4 to 5% return on assets. So it does not align. So I think it's very important that the deals are negotiated on the expectations of returns rather than just margins. And also some of the in the 2000s when a lot of global companies came in, they were in a hurry to just sign as many contracts as they could. And that quickly started falling apart because you, unlike the Western world in America or in Europe, where you have more institutional asset owners, we had a lot of smaller asset owners. So it's very important to check the financial, how financially stable they are, right? Because a hotel is not just like a one time investment. Hotel requires regular cash flow until the asset stabilizes. And that might take years depending on which kind of cycle you are in. And a hotel also requires regular upkeep. So you continuously require renovations. And overall, you just need a partner who is more financially stable. A lot of some of the deals that happened in the early 2000s, a lot of those asset owners ended up going bankrupt. And that not only bad for your hotel but also bad for your brand image because you're not able to maintain that kind of standard. Also, again, renovation, that's a huge cost that it can have. So a brand will be more focused on its image, it wants to provide the best service. uh, but the hotel owner, before it has even recovered the money, might be asked to put in more money to develop it more, renovate it more. So it's very important for both the parties to be cognizant of the fact that what each player would require and what are the returns that is expected. Um, Sometimes this is also a very interesting thing that happens. So sometimes owners end up overbuilding the asset. So this is something that happened with Panchal group in Pune. So they were building a Marriott property. They already had a agreement in place and they were building the asset. But in the flow, he went ahead and got the best fittings and he overbuilt the asset. And he's like, I don't want just normal Marriott property. I want the premium end. I want a JW Marriott. But Marriott was of the view that for the area that you're operating in, for the market that you're operating in, I don't think those kind of rates apply or that kind of branding should be given. So in the end, it did end up becoming a JW Marriott. But again, that's one of the places where the brands and owners have conflict. Again, when the owners overbuild the assets. So interesting problem. Okay, so let's look at how the Indian market is right now. So if you look at the top 20 players by number of rooms, Marriott is at the top. So Marriott is the largest group currently. This data is as of August. And that's quickly followed by IHCL, that's your Taj group. And then you have Radisson. Interesting, if you look at just the top 10, the top 10 numbers make up 68% of the branded supply. So a look at the entire thing is almost looking at the entire industry and all the brands that are present. Uh, and in the top 10, it's a 50-50 split between your international owners, uh, international brands, and your Indian brands. So in Indian, you have your Indian hotels, ITC, Lemon Tree, Concept Hospitality, and Royal Orchid. Some of the key terms that you should know while looking at the hotel industry is your ARR, that's your average room revenue. That and the second one is occupancy rates, and the third is RevPAR. RevPAR is nothing but your average room revenue multiplied by your occupancy rate. So this is a lovely chart, is one of my favorite. It gives you the entire 2-decade view, and it brilliantly shows the cycle and the cyclicality of this industry. So let's look at it in phases. So if you look at phase one, over here your occupancy rates were continuously increasing, and your average room revenue and your RevPAR have been really healthy. So from 3,200, they went up to almost 8,000 in 2008. So this was the time when there was not much supply, and the economy had opened up, and the demand was really high, and the industry saw an amazing growth in that time. That's the boom. After that, so seeing this boom, a lot of supply started coming in. Now you should know that, and as any asset in hotel industry takes a couple of years to come in. So you might plan to build the asset in this boom time, but by the time the supply comes in, you might be in the next part of the cycle. So again, a lot of people seeing this boom realize that there is a lot of demand that we should capture, and everyone started putting in supply. And in the phase two, you saw that the supply started to oversee the demand. So supply started coming in at 14%, while the demand only grew at 10%. So during that period, you saw that your ARRs actually started dropping, and your occupancy rates were also quite low. And it was a huge phase from 2009 to 2015 almost, where the occupancy rates were flat, and to keep the occupancy rates at those levels, they had to actually take price cuts. In phase three was recovery. So in this, finally the supply slowed down. So your supply was just at 6% and your demand was growing at 8%. So you started seeing a mild recovery happening. Of course, this recovery was a little slower because during this time you also had your GST implementation plus your demonetization, which affected the industry as well. So it was a slow recovery, but still a recovery nonetheless. And then after that, we were hit by COVID, which was a huge slump. And however, the post the COVID, we saw your revenge travel come in, and your occupancies and your average room revenue finally increased. And it is funny to see that how it is after 2008, almost 15 years later, now is when they're actually crossing that line. Those same average room revenues, it was around 8,000 this time, and now it's around 8,055. So we are now crossing. Now, of course, it's very, while this chart looks amazing. It's important to double click on it also. So a lot has changed in this time. A lot of supply has come in. Now, in terms of supply also, earlier most of our supply used to be in the luxury segment. So over here you can see that luxury and upper scale uh, were more prominent during the 2008, and post that you saw your economy segment growing. So when you look at average room revenues, some of those average room revenues seem a little more compressed because your economy segment has grown. So that compresses your numbers a little bit. But still, something interesting would be ki in 2008, so foreign travelers are a huge part of the hotel industry. So in 2008, your average room revenues, if you look at in dollar term, was $200, and currently it's just $100. So in terms of dollars, we are almost at half of what we were in 2015 years ago. So we still haven't recovered in that sense. Another thing to know is that each segment, each city behaves differently. So it's very important when you're looking at this data to also look at the city-wise data. So if you look at the city data for the top 10 cities in India, there are some very interesting trends. So something I would like to point out is Bangalore. So Bangalore in 2007 had average room rates of 9,700 to around 9,900, and that has fallen to around 7,500 to 7,700. And you also have Pune that has seen a fall in average room revenues from around 8,000 to 6,000. Something that has done exceptionally well would be Goa, which has increased their average room rates from 6,000 to 10,000 currently. So it's a segment that has done really well. But again, when you look at it, it's very important again to look at the supply side. So if you look at the supply data, back in 2007, Bangalore just had around 3,500 rooms. Currently, it has around 19,000 rooms. And most of that has come in the mid-scale economy segment as well. So that's why you see a fall. So it has seen a 458% increase in supply during this period. Uh, Also in Pune, you have seen a 483% increase in supply. So before, where there were only 1,300 rooms, there are now actually 8,000 rooms. Goa is a good story because not only did their average room revenues increase, their supply also increased. So over there, you can say that the demand was extremely, extremely high for them to pull out something like this. Despite a 257% increase in supply, they were still able to substantially increase their average room revenue as well. So these are some of the key metrics by hotel positioning. So um, this is your data from 2022 to 2023. So you've seen a huge increase in your luxury segments. So luxury segments, the current ARR is around 17,000. Your upscale is around 10,000. Upper upscale is 10,000. Upscale is 8,000. Mid-scale 5,500, and economy is 3,600. Uh, the occupancies are the highest in your upscale and mid-scale segment in this category. This is also something very interesting. This is the total revenue per occupied room. So hotels may also get revenues from their uh, banquet halls, their F&Bs. So you also get a lot of additional revenue in your luxury segment. So while it was just 17,000 per room that they were getting, if you look at the total revenue, it's around 35%. Now, of course, this can be a little more. This is not saying that one person who is renting the room is actually spending the double. But they also have a lot of events. They have weddings, they have other banqueting events that they keep. So that also skews the number. But it's again very important if you're studying a hotel in the luxury segment that they have revenues from other sources as well, other than your room revenue. This is not very high or almost negligent for your economy and budget. This again because for an economy segment, it does not make sense for them to venture into the to focus too much on the F&B side. So in the economy segment, if you actually cut down your room cost perfectly, you can make up to like 70-80% margins. But in F&B, no matter what you do, the highest you can go is like 40-50%. It's very hard to get a number about that because you have a lot of fixed costs, you have a lot of um, well employees that you would need to run that show as well. So in the economy segment, they would want to give the smallest possible place to the F&B or not keep it at all. So the revenue from others would always be very, very negligent in the economy side. So let's look at the where we are now and what kind of signings are happening in the industry. So in 2023, if you look at it by number of keys, 53%, 56% was domestic and 44% was international. But by number of properties, this looks a little different. So by this, you can say that while by number of rooms, domestic is doing more. In terms of size, international brands are actually getting the bigger sized hotels. Uh, Types of contract signing. So most of the contract signing is managed. So 84% of the contracts that are signed in 2023 were managed, 12% were franchised, and 2% were leased. These numbers are different when you look at Asian countries. So again, for global brands in America or in Europe, you'd actually see more franchisee contracts happen. But in Asian countries, management contract is the way to lead. Again, because the industry is underdeveloped over here. If you look at by the signings by development, 47% of the signings were greenfield project, about 36% were brownfield expansions, and 15% were conversions. So this can also include uh, unbranded to branded, and also from one flag to another, say a Hilton moving to Hyatt. If you see by market positioning, most of the supply for the past 5 years has been coming in the mid scale and the upper upscale segment. And if you look at it, in what segment? It's mostly commercial segment. That's your business segment where most of your supply is coming in. Some of the long-term structural tailwinds of this industry. So the India's economy growth, it's supposed to become a $7 trillion economy by 2030, third largest economy. So and your middle class is also growing, so more discretionary spending. There's rising disposable income, and the FTA recovery is also expected at around 25 million. So, if the FTA, that's your foreign tourist arrivals, that is also a very interesting data. So, if you look at the 2019 data, the foreign tourist arrivals are around 10.5 million. And if you look at the data for 2023, it was around 9.5. So, your foreign travelers have actually not recovered to your pre COVID levels. So, whatever growth that we saw in the industry, that hyper recovery was mainly led by domestic consumers and not international consumers. So when that demand comes in, that will also give a boost to the industry. Now, India is also underpenetrated. We have very less penetration of hotel rooms. Government is also focusing on infra, developing roads, airports, and highways. So as that comes in by 2030, we have about 80 to 100 new airports coming in. So that would open up new locations and new destinations where hotels can be developed. As the infrastructure becomes better, you can have, again, the connectivity becomes better and you can have more hotels come up. New destinations are opening up in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, and there's also focus on your conventions and your MICE. So my segment, that's your meeting, incentives, conventions, and events. So this is a very interesting segment because you have a lot of infrastructure that has been built over here. Something like the building of your Geo Convention Center in Bombay has really helped us organize events at those bigger scales and bring in that kind of demand. You also have your Bharat Mandapam in Delhi, your Yashobhoomi. All of that has made India capable of holding more larger scale events. And again, that leads to better demand for your hotels in those areas. So, how many of you attended the Coldplay concert? Did anyone get a chance to go there? Yeah. So, I was back in the queue, like 7 lakh was my number. But again, a very interesting number seeing the kind of demand that was generated for this event. Um, It was a 5-day event, and just on one single day, on the Republic Day in Ahmedabad, the crowd was as big as 1.34 lakhs. So that's the kind of supply that's the kind of demand that people have for these kind of uh, experiences. For these kind of experience, people are more willing to spend on experiences these days. But during this time, the hotel prices also went all wonky. So you had in Navi Mumbai, the hotel prices touched almost 90,000 and all sold out, by the way. And in Ahmedabad, also the room prices were about 50 to 1 lakh. So this is again a very interesting thing. Now, this is a one-off event, but this also shows that the Indian consumer is again willing to pay for these kind of experiences. So we'll see more concerts like these come up now that we have the infrastructure to again host these kind of events as well. And this again creates huge demand for your hotels. Weddings. So again, a lot of my friends, I don't know about you, but a lot of my friends are getting married now. And in this last 3 years, I attended 3 weddings and two of them were destinations. So I'm pretty sure most of you are aware that the destination wedding trend is full boom and everyone wants to do a destination wedding these days. One of the biggest wedding of our decade was your Ambani's. So they spend about 5,000 crores for a wedding. Of course, not everyone is Ambani, but the overall weddings are getting expensive and people are more spending on weddings more and more. So the average spend has risen to up to 32 to 35 lakhs. That's how much people are willing to spend on weddings these days. Um, so what you see over here is the Udaivilas property in Udaipur. So Udaipur is one of the most expensive destinations, Udaipur along with Jaipur, when it comes to destination weddings. So a wedding in Udaivilas could cost you about 2 to 4 lakhs per guest. So for a gathering of say 175 to 200 people, it can set you back about 3.5 to 4 CR for a 2-day wedding, by the way. And people are willing to spend that much because the demand is crazy for them. So again, a very interesting segment, and a lot you're seeing a lot of hotels being developed, uh, specially designed for Indian weddings. So a huge chain and a huge opportunity as well. Some of the other key trends of the hotel segment, again, meetings, incentives, conventions, exhibitions. So my segment is huge, and the global and then global events that we are hosting in India now. The G20 meet was an example. So that brings in a lot of demand, and again, we do have less supply. So this, as and when India grows more capable of holding these kind of events, um, you'll see more and more demand increasing for your hotel industry. You also have your sport tourism. So we hosted the World Cup last year. So that also brought in a lot of demand. And this also positions in India is again looking forward to more opportunities to hold events of these scales going forward. So again, that's another demand driver that we have. You also have luxury wellness resorts. This is a very interesting segment, and it's growing in size. Still very small, and because there are few players, they have a lot of the charging really exorbitant rates. But your Ayurveda wellness resorts, spa resorts, they're going much beyond spas nowadays. You have like these 10-day luxury wellness retreat where people go detoxify from their for social medias, and they have their doctors over there and spa treatments. Again, a brilliant segment, and it has a your customer base stays for a longer time. So each stay is of a longer period, and your room rents and your extra revenue is also much more higher. So it's an amazing opportunity. I was reading this one comment by, I don't remember which exactly, but I think it's in a hotel in Kovalam. And before, it used to be a normal hotel back in 2000s. And when it was acquired, the average room revenue was around 4,500. After converting it into a Ayurvedic wellness retreat, the ARRs are 40,000. So that's the kind of jump that you can see by moving to this segment. Religious tourism is also something that is growing, and religious tourism again has always existed, but we are seeing more branded supply coming in this segment. So something like your Ayodhya is a very good example. You're seeing much more bigger players coming in and putting in uh, their flag in Ayodhya. So yeah, let's get down to some numbers. We are going to do a comparative analysis. So we are going to look at the big three. That's your Taj, EIH is Oberoi, and ITC. Chalet, we're going to look at Chalet because that's one of the pure asset play model that they have. They are purely asset owners. And Lemon Tree, they are mainly in the mid segment, trying to go into the luxury segment as well. So if you look at it in terms of revenue, Indian Hotels is the leader. So with around 7,000 crores in revenue, that's closely followed, not closely, like almost at half, we have ITC, that's at 3,500. I don't know, at around 3,000. And yeah, Oberoi at around 2,500. And both your Chalet and Lemon Tree at 1,000 and 1,200 crores, respectively. In terms of number of operational keys, so I've also put in projected numbers that's based on the pipeline that they have. So approx numbers again based on their disclosures. Uh, Taj currently has around like 25,000 rooms, and ITC has around 12,000 rooms. Uh, if you actually look at the managed key shares, so that has been increasing. So for Lemon Tree and Indian Hotels, so Indian Hotels used to have around like 28% managed key share, which is currently at 40%, and it is going to grow up to 55%. Currently, the highest is with ITC, they have 55% managed key share. Something very interesting is that Indian Hotels, which has 25,000 rooms, and out of that 44% is managed key shares. The contribution to the revenue is 7%. So revenue that comes from the managed key is only 7%. Of course, most of that revenue directly flows into your EBITDA, so your margins improve. So it's a bigger contribution to your EBITDA, whereas the percentage of revenue is still very small. But again, because there are no costs included and it flows likely to EBITDA, your margins can improve a lot and your returns also increases. Um, so we spoke about the key terms, right? So occupancy rate is one of the occupancy, ARR and RevPAR. They can give you everything that you need to know about the company. They're very, very important terms. And something you should know is that hotel industry has a lot of fixed operational costs, a lot of fixed overheads that they have. So even if there's one guest staying, they still have to operate. Say, if they have three hotels, they still have to operate all the three restaurants also in that hotels, even if there's one guest. So your operational costs will always remain fixed. You can't just fire half your staff because you have lesser guests. Um, so your operational costs are really high. So because of that, you need your occupancies to also remain at a certain level. So if I just give a ballpark number, in the leisure segment, you need minimum 50 to 55% occupancy rates. And in your business segment, uh, you need about 60 to 65% occupancy rate to break even. So that's why when you saw like even in the downturn, you saw the occupancy was being maintained at around 60%, even if there was low ARRs, because they need that much occupancy to for it to make operational sense to even run that hotel. So your occupancy rates are very, very important. So if you look at it, again, I'm looking at a 10-year period over here, and we saw that there was a huge slump again during your 2014 to 2019 period. So over here, your occupancy rates were between 60 to 70%. Over here, only Lemon Tree and Chalet are a little higher, but mostly between 60 to 70%. And over here, you saw like in 23, 24, a recovery happening, and your occupancy rates are healthy at around 70 to 80%. And your ARRs have also improved. So you know that they're just not cutting the rates to increase the occupancy. This is actual demand that is coming in. So you have seen near 50% increase in your ARRs in your IHCL, Oberoi, ITC, and about a 60% increase in your RevPAR. So it's a healthy increase in demand that has happened during this period. So when this happens, your operating leverage comes into play, and it is shown so beautifully. So your EBITDA margins at your low occupancies were about 20 to 30%. But once your occupancy rates went up, once your occupancy rates goes up, your fixed cost is taken care of, and your operating leverage comes into play. So every incremental increase in your occupancy will directly flow into your EBITDA margins. So your EBITDA margins are now in the range of 30 to 50%. So that's the kind of jump that you can see, and that's the beauty of the operating leverage in this industry. Also, you this just not the operating leverage. You also see like the management contracts have also increased, so you have more income coming from that side also. So that has also increased the margins a certain bit. Your PAT margins also, again, it has been very choppy in these years. So that's not only because that your operating margins were low, but also most of these companies were heavily debt ridden. So over here, you not only see your operating leverage, but also a lot of capital was raised during this period. So Indian Hotels themselves have done like 3 rounds of fundraising, and a lot of IPOs came out, the IPO money and your fundraising, and because of that, they have been able to deleverage the balance sheet a little bit and pay off the debt. So now most of them are at healthy profit margins. Your ROCs have also increased with your increase in your occupancies, again, operating leverage. So where your occupancy, your ROCs were between 4 to 10%, they're now between 10 to 15% for your hotels. So yeah, this is a very interesting chart. So I know it's a little tiny, um, but this is just the market cap of your Indian hotels, and this is as of yesterday. So you have your Indian hotels over here, and it is very interesting to see that this yellow line over here, that's Oberoi. So there was this period of time when your Oberoi and your Indian hotels were at the same market cap. But of course, Indian hotels have gone on a different trajectory. They have expanded into different segments and gone into lower segments as well. While Oberoi has stuck on to what they know best and focused on the luxury side of it only. Currently, your Indian hotels are around 1 lakh crores ka market cap, and after that you have ITC with ITC hotels, which is demerged and listed. That's at around 34,000. And then you have your Oberoi as around 20,000, and Chalet at around 14,000, and Lemon Tree at around 10,000. If you look at the valuation comparison also, Indian Hotels is currently the most expensive. This is in terms of EV/EBITDA. So Indian Hotels trades at around 37 times EV/EBITDA. The valuations have corrected. It touched a peak of like 47, 48 times. But during this current market fall, it has corrected to around 37. Still the most expensive by a huge mark. Chalet is at around 25 times, closely followed by Lemon Tree at 21, and you have your EIH, that's your Oberoi at around 17%. Uh, we also had a lot of IPOs that came up recently in the past 2 years. So you have had Sami Hotels, again a PE-backed asset owner model. Yeah, Park, they are started off in Kolkata, but more into boutique hotels. Juniper Hotels is with the Saraf Group and a partnership with the Hyatt. And Mentor Hotels is again of the Pune-based realty company, the hotel segment of the Pune-based company. Collectively, these four IPOs have raised around 5,900 crores in terms of issue size. And these are two big upcoming IPOs as well. You have your Brigade Hotels, which is anticipated to be a 900 crores issue. And you have your Leela, which is now owned by Brookfield. This is a bigger one. This is anticipated to be a 5,000 crores car issue. So, yeah, just to give an idea of what kind of money is being raised in the market in the up cycle. And yeah, some of the references. So, some of the good references are Harvard, HVS, Anurag, and Hotel Weird. So they publish data monthly, and they have this brilliant annual report also. They give good industry data and really good insights. So they are amazing in terms of getting more industry data. Some of the books that I enjoyed were from Oberoi to Oyo. It gives you a good bird eye perspective. If you want to double click on the ITC hotels part of it, Borders to Boardroom is a good book to pick up. Hello. Hello. Anyways, Borders to Boardroom is a good book to pick up. And then you also have Hello. Yeah. You also have Dare to Dream, which is again biography on MS Oberoi, and it is again a brilliant book to read because it tells you the entire journey. Again, the hotel industry is all about the stories, and stories not just of the companies but individual hotels. Very interesting segment. I think you should pick up the books, and that's it. Thank you. I know it was a little long, but I hope you enjoyed it.
Hi. So we cover anything on vacation ownership? Because I think there's one segment which is also part of the hotel industry is a vacation ownership segment.
You mean Mahindra and
Yeah, I
Mahindra?
mean,
Yeah. So that's the timeshare segment. So that's also a very interesting segment. I didn't dig too much into it. It's a model that has worked globally and has done well. In India, I think Mahindra Group is the only one that does it. So that's basically when you take instead of you take an ownership in the asset itself, right? So it's subscription based. Mahindra Group gives about a 25-year-old subscription, and you have to pay an upfront money and yearly maintenance, and you get about a week uh, to vacation in any of their properties, a week, a year. So you can choose your time, you can choose which property you want to go, and you can basically go and stay there. So again, it's a very interesting concept, and it works really well because over here you have float. So you have definite occupancy that's gonna come in, and that float that you have, that's so capital is one of the biggest part of real estate, right? And the cost of capital can define your entire returns that you have from an asset. So when Mahindra Group does that, it's basically getting free float, so money at very almost no cost, and then you're building the asset using those capital. So again, a brilliant business model, and it is kind of it, something like COVID didn't affect them as much, which is great because again, it's a very cyclical business. So you have that money still coming in even when the industry is not doing well. So again, an interesting model, but no other company is actively looking at it. It's just Mahindra, and they're doing a good job. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. Very nice presentation. I think they should omit writing junior analyst and all that because I don't think anybody in the room think it was really really good presentation. Uh, I have
Thank you. Maybe.
I have one question.
Mhm.
We are all in financial market, so either we have franchisees or own office. Here, one more concept is there: management,
Hmm.
managed keys. Okay, so what is the I understand the franchisee model where you know Raja will take a franchisee, owns the asset, runs, pays, and everything.
Hmm.
But suppose the hotel JW Marriott is given on management contract, then who bears the cost? Because, as you say, they get 7 or 8% as a management fee and 2-3% out of branding. So, is that 10% big enough to run the entire staff? Because you said fixed cost and everything is very heavy.
So yeah, I forgot to mention that, and thank you for bringing it up. So all the cost is borne by the owner itself. So the employees are trained by Marriott, but salaries of those employees will still be paid by the owner. So all the cost is done by them. So they'll decide on the renovation plan, what needs to be done, what are the costs, and all the costs are then reimbursed by the hotel owners to Marriott. So they don't actually incur the cost, and whatever the revenue they're getting is only for the expertise, and it directly flows into their.
Employees are the role of the hotel owners, property owners,
Yeah.
basically.
The salaries will be paid by the property owners. They'll actually be married employees, but their salaries will be paid by
Okay.
the hotel owners.
Thank you.
There was this slide, a 10-year slide that you had put across uh, right early in the presentation.
Okay. The cycle.
Yeah, the cycle. So if I look at the data, are we saying that your ARRs over a 10-year cycle are broadly at the same level, like from 2008 to about 2024, are we broadly at the same level in terms of ARRs?
So overall in ARRs, yes, but again, this data has to be broken down into segments. So your luxury prices have increased. So your supply in your economy segment has gone up. So that compresses your average. So when you're averaging it, you have more
So the
proportion
weighted
of
average would have
the weighted average has come down. So
luxury has gone up by how much over?
largely it has gone up. So wait, I do have an extra slide. So I don't want to put it up tiny numbers, but if you look at this data, in the luxury side, it was around 11,200 back in 2008, which is currently at 15,000. So there has been an increase,
So that's like a 40%
40% increase.
but that would have not kept pace with inflation, right? If you look at a 15-year.
No, that these are not inflation adjusted numbers. Average rates, but for segments, again, you're looking at 5-star and 2-star. Again, to take away that bias of the average coming down. So there has been an increase. I wouldn't say it's completely flat, but again, it has changed.
So broadly, if you look at the luxury segment, which has been the best performing segment
Mm-hmm.
over the last few years, if you adjusting for inflation, actually the ARRs are actually lower.
They are.
50 years, as an overall industry,
Hmm.
it's really not keeping pace with inflation.
It hasn't.
So, ma'am, I would like to ask that, like in case of hotels, if it's managed by someone else, like if I take example of Sami, so it has around 5,000 room keys, but it is managed like for example by Marriott. So the room in both of them or like this to a particular one.
So over here in the slide which I showed, inventory by brands, so it only looks at brands, so it won't be counted double. So it's only showing the brand-wise numbers. So it won't show you asset owners numbers at all.
Okay.
So you said IT started the concept of FN. Dependence are of these larger hotels basically.
So that would be around 40 to 50%. So 40 to 50% of the revenue is actually coming from F&B segment.
Oh, that
Right,
big,
it's
is
quite
it?
big.
Because of the room occupancy. Because of the lower room occupancy, is it?
Not really, but because they also keep organize large size events. So you have your weddings also that they host, you have your conferences also that they host, and this banqueting events. So that actually adds up to the F&B revenue a lot. And you also have guests coming from outside, not just the hotel guests using the restaurants, but you have guests coming from outside also. So it's a significant portion of their revenue. It does, it does. My only the food part of it.
Only the food
Hmm.
part. So then the other part is the room rent, which
Room
is
rent, yeah.
included in that.
Hmm.
So do you have any? I'm just asking if you have any breakdown.
I don't have that, I'm sorry. But it's very easily available, you'll get that break.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
So Buffett talked about good, great, and gruesome businesses in 2007 later. Because hotel industry required a lot of capital to scale with a low ROCE, and in India, as you said, managed key share is very high. So as an investor, how we can basically value those businesses based on the number of rooms they have or based on the EBITDA margins? How as an investor, how we can basically value those businesses?
So in India is actually quite low if you compare it to the global averages. So if you look at something like Marriott, they have been able to scale globally. So that gives them one edge ki they're not they're not restricted to the economic cycle or the economic fluctuation of one particular country. They have an overall exposure. So that helps balance of the risk a little bit. And on top of that, your capital investment is much more lower. So as you go the asset right way, you have lesser and lesser capital actually on line. So you are, it actually takes a bad business model where your asset is really heavy. It's a different business model. I wouldn't say bad. It's a different where your expectations are different with it. You have more yield-based expectations rather than returns. But as you go the asset right way, your balance sheet becomes lighter and lighter. And you are able to scale without over leveraging your balance sheet, and that takes away a lot of the risk and cyclicality that you mentioned about the hotel business that exists, because it's so well diversified with 9,000 rooms across the globe, owning only 51% of it. It has a very good diversified risk, and their balance sheet is still light after having exposure to about assets worth $500 billion. So yeah, so if you continue to scale like that, it is great. In India, the companies are still very small. So here, when you're evaluating the companies, you'll have to look at it each asset wise. Something like your Juniper Hotels that just came out with IPO, it still has a very high dependence on just one hotel. That's your Grand Hyatt. So it has this kind of concentration also if you have the asset heavy model. So again, you have to evaluate each company based on what it is and have your return expectation based on those kind of structure.
Anyone from the Zoom audience has any question, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Thank you for the presentation. Can you comment a little bit about free cash flow profile as well?
So I don't have the numbers ready with me on the Indian numbers, but globally, most of the companies are now free cash flow generating, and they're actually giving back a lot of money to the owners to your investors as well. So they are turned into a cash guzzler to actually a cash generating and a cash giving companies. I don't have the numbers readily available for the Indian companies. I'm sorry about that. But yeah.
No problem. Thank you. Environments. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Whenever things got rough, I always remember what my father used to say.
Running a business does test a man, my son. There are ups and downs, glorious highs, and sometimes a low that leaves you feeling defeated.
The character of a man and the character of a business are not very different, are they?
Yes. But when the chips are down, we must stand up, dust ourselves off, and motor on.
Volatility. It's a funny thing. It makes you question yourself and wonder if you've made all the right decisions.
Sure, you can question some of your decisions, but stay steadfast on your goals.
Dad always said, there are no shortcuts and no quick profits.
There are no free lunches, are there? There is only one
right way.
At PPFAS, we think like Rahul and his father. That volatility is a fact of running a business. And buying equity shares is like owning a part of that business. We use value investing principles to manage your money. This means we invest in the right businesses at reasonable prices and for a longer term.
PPFAS Mutual Fund. There's only one right way. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.